All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. So today we're taking a look at, we've got some excerpts here from Twilight. And, we're not going to like rehash the whole plot or anything,
Yeah.
but we really want to take a look and see what we can find, like deeper meanings and symbolism and stuff like that in these excerpts.
Right. Yeah. Going kind of beyond just like Team Edward or Team Jacob and
Right.
sort of looking at what these excerpts can tell us about human nature or, our fascination with the unknown and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really interesting way to approach this because I think there's a lot there if you look closely enough. One of the first things that really stood out to me was, how often the excerpts describe the Cullens as having like this inhuman beauty.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, they're attractive. It's like there's this kind of unsettling quality to it. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think the author might be going for with that description?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting choice of words, isn't it, to describe beauty as inhuman. Because I think in literature, I mean, a lot of times when you see beauty described as inhuman,
Sure.
it kind of hints at something beyond like just the mortal realm.
Right.
It suggests that there's something else going on, something maybe a little dangerous, a little alluring,
Yeah.
Like if you think about, sirens in mythology or, even vampires, their beauty is often kind of like a tool or a weapon.
It's true. It's like it's a lure. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of danger, there's also, those moments where Edward's incredible strength and speed are kind of hinted at, like when he lifts the van.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like the author's kind of playing with our perception of what's like humanly possible.
Absolutely. And I think those little glimpses of like exaggerated power, where he
Yeah.
does something that's clearly not possible,
Right.
it creates a sense of awe and it builds suspense, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes you wonder, well, if he can do that, what else can he do?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are the limits? It starts to blur those lines between what's real and what's supernatural.
Right.
Have you ever like come across a description like that made you just stop and think, wait, is that even possible?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like all the time. And I think that's part of what makes, fantasy so much fun, right? Is that it lets us play with those what if scenarios.
Yeah, totally. And then there's the whole mind reading element.
Yeah.
I mean, Bella's reactions at first, trying to blame it on radioactive spiders
Right.
or hypnotism is pretty funny.
It is.
But I can relate to that feeling of like trying to make sense of something that's just so outside our normal understanding of how the world works. What about you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like you come up against something that just doesn't fit into your understanding, and your brain is going to try to find an explanation. And sometimes it's going to be a pretty far-fetched one.
That's so true. It's like, how do we even begin to like process something like that? And it makes you think about like the limits of our own knowledge, right?
Right.
Like if someone told you they could read minds, how could you ever actually prove or disprove that?
I know. And I think that's part of what makes these excerpts so compelling.
Yeah.
Because they really force you to kind of confront the edges of what you think is possible and what's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that are maybe outside of our normal understanding, Bella's dreams are full of all this symbolism, right? You've got the forest, the beach, and then this character, Jacob, who keeps popping up.
Right?
It's like they're foreshadowing future events, emotional states, all of that. What's your take on like the role of dreams in these excerpts?
Well, I mean, dreams are always really interesting territory in literature, right? Because they can represent so many different things, like the unconscious mind or hidden desires, fears, all of that. And in these excerpts, I think, you've got the forest, which could symbolize the unknown, like a journey into the depths of ourselves, maybe.
Hmm.
And then beaches, which often represent transitions, the kind of boundary between, the conscious and unconscious.
Oh, interesting.
So I think it makes you wonder if maybe our own dreams hold hidden meanings or premonitions even that we just haven't learned to interpret yet.
Yeah, like are we missing something? I don't know. It's so fascinating. Have you ever had a dream that like felt really symbolic or significant to you?
Oh, all the time. I mean, some of them are so vivid, it's like they're trying to tell you something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of vivid, you can't deny that there's this intense attraction between Bella and Edward. But he keeps warning her about how dangerous he is. And it's that classic, like, allure of the forbidden, right? Like, the more we're told to avoid something, the more we want it. What do you think it is about Edward that draws Bella in, despite all the risks?
I think it's a lot of things, right? I mean, there's the obvious, like, physical attraction, but there's also just the mystery surrounding him.
Yeah.
He's different, he's powerful, he's potentially dangerous, which just makes him, like, inherently intriguing.
Yeah, there's that edge.
Yeah. And then I also think he just seems to see something special in Bella, something that maybe she doesn't even see in herself yet.
That's a good point. Yeah, he kind of sees her potential, maybe. That's interesting. And it's also interesting how she reacts to his otherness.
Yeah.
She doesn't shy away from it. She's asking all these questions, even when the answers are kind of unsettling.
Yeah.
Like she's drawn to his complexity as much as his looks.
Totally. And I think that's a really key element of their dynamic is that, Bella isn't just passively accepting all of this, like, ooh, you're a vampire. Okay, cool. She's actively trying to understand it,
Yeah.
She's curious. And that curiosity is driving her to look, beyond just the surface and grapple with, like, what does it actually mean to love someone who is, so fundamentally different?
It's a huge question, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just her relationship with Edward that's complex. We also start to see her friendship with Jacob developing in these excerpts.
Mhm.
And there's a sense that these relationships are going to, like, collide at some point.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like her choices are going to have some pretty big consequences. And not just for her, but for, like, everyone around her.
Definitely. It's like one of those classic stories where a seemingly small choice ends up having these huge unintended consequences, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the excerpts really highlight that, like the weight of our decisions,
Yeah.
especially when those decisions involve, love and loyalties to different people. It's never simple. And speaking of love, there's also this underlying tension, right, between Bella and Edward.
Yeah.
He's constantly struggling with his own nature, trying to protect her from his darker impulses.
Uh-huh.
It makes you wonder, like, can true love really exist when there's this constant fear of hurting the one you love?
Mm. Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, it's a question that's been explored in literature and mythology for centuries, right?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It really is. And it makes you think about, the sacrifices we're willing to make for love and whether some desires are just like too dangerous to indulge.
Yeah. And speaking of dangerous desires, I mean, we get these little hints of a whole hidden world in these excerpts, right?
Oh, yeah. Like we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly, like just a glimpse behind the curtain. That makes you wonder what else is lurking down there, just waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, it definitely leaves you wanting more.
It does, it does.
A lot more.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we should probably take a little break and then come back and dive into part 2 of this Twilight deep dive.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, so we're back and ready to jump back into these Twilight excerpts. And one thing that really starts to come into focus in this next batch is the whole conflict between vampires and werewolves.
Right. It's not just like, a forbidden love kind of thing.
Right.
There's this whole like history of animosity between these two groups, and Bella kind of gets caught right in the middle of it.
It's true. And it's almost like the story is using these supernatural beings to explore some real world tensions and prejudices.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you've got these two groups that represent totally different ways of being, different values,
Mhm.
and their inability to coexist peacefully. I mean, it really does kind of mirror some of the conflicts that we see playing out in our own world.
It does.
Hmm.
And, it's not just about differences in species either. I mean,
Yeah.
there are divisions within each group as well, right?
Sure.
Like, you've got the Cullens, Edward's family, and they've chosen to live so differently from other vampires.
Yeah, they have this whole code of ethics, a
Yeah.
conscious decision not to prey on humans, which is pretty unusual for vampires.
Yeah. And it makes you think, like, are we really bound by our nature? Or do we actually have the power to choose a different path?
Right. That's such a big question. And I think the Cullens are a really good example of that. They're challenging the traditional, vampire narrative. They're saying, hey, it's possible to resist those urges and create a different kind of existence.
Yeah, they're trying to find that balance, right?
Yeah.
Like between their nature and their desire to coexist with humans. And it kind of makes you think about the compromises that we all make in our own lives, trying to reconcile different parts of ourselves.
Totally. And speaking of compromises, that uneasy truce between the Cullens and the werewolves, that's a great example.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they've agreed to this set of boundaries, but you can just feel the tension, right?
Yeah.
Like, things could just erupt at any moment. It's a fragile piece built on this foundation of mistrust and these ancient grudges.
It's like they're walking on eggshells,
Totally.
Yeah. A- And then you bring in the Volturi,
Oh, yeah.
this ancient and powerful group of vampires who are basically like the enforcers, right?
Right. They enforce the laws of the vampire world.
Right, and their presence just raises the stakes like so much.
It does, because they represent the established order. They're the guardians of tradition,
Uh-huh.
and they are not to be messed with. So when they arrive, it really does just kind of like throw Bella's world into chaos. It's a good reminder that even in the supernatural realm, there are rules and consequences.
It's like she stumbled into this game that she doesn't understand the rules to, and all the players have been playing it for centuries.
Right. Exactly.
And, she's not just a pawn in this game.
Mhm.
It's like her very existence is a threat to their authority.
It is, because she represents like a disruption to their world. She's this wild card that they can't control, can't quite figure out.
Right. They don't know what to do with her.
Exactly.
And it's like she's this catalyst for change, whether she intends to be or not.
Yeah.
And speaking of change, I mean, Bella's own transformation is like a major theme in these excerpts.
Right.
She's constantly being exposed to new ideas and experiences that challenge her worldview.
Yeah. It's a real journey of self-discovery, and it's not always easy or comfortable.
Right.
She's forced to confront her fears, her prejudices, even her own desires, and she's constantly evolving, and that evolution can be really exciting, but it can also be really scary.
That makes sense, right? It's like, I mean, change is hard.
Yeah.
Even when it's good, it can be hard.
Absolutely.
And she's being pulled in all these different directions, right? Like towards Edward and the vampire world, towards Jacob and the werewolves, and then also towards her own humanity.
Right, and it's this classic coming-of-age story, but with this added supernatural element that just, like, explodes it, you know?
Yeah. And her choices have consequences that extend far beyond her own life. They're impacting everyone around her, and even the balance of power between these ancient supernatural forces.
Totally. I mean, talk about pressure.
I know, right?
Right.
And those choices become even more complicated when Edward proposes.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a huge decision, and it really brings to light the sacrifices that people are willing to make for love.
It does. It's this beautiful and terrifying proposition, isn't it?
It is.
To choose immortality, to leave behind everything you know for a chance at eternal love. I mean, that would test anyone's resolve.
Oh, yeah. And the excerpts really leave us hanging. Like, what is Bella going to choose?
Right. It's the ultimate cliffhanger.
And speaking of cliffhangers, we also get this new threat introduced in these excerpts. Victoria,
Oh, yeah.
this vampire who's obsessed with revenge, and she's determined to hunt Bella down. It's like the danger level just keeps escalating.
It does. And it forces Bella to really confront her own vulnerabilities.
Right.
And fight for her survival. She can't just sit back and let things happen anymore.
Right. She has to take action.
Yeah.
And Victoria's presence really underscores this idea that, even in a world of supernatural beings, the past has a way of catching up to you.
Yeah, she represents the consequences of past actions, like those ripple effects of choices that you can't just undo.
Yeah. Yeah. It's heavy stuff.
It is.
And then on top of all that, you've got Jacob declaring his love for Bella, which adds yet another layer of complexity.
Oh, yeah.
He's clearly torn between his feelings for her and his loyalty to his pack.
Right.
And it's a reminder that, love doesn't always follow a neat and predictable path.
It's messy, it gets complicated.
It does. It's like a classic love triangle, but it's so much more than that, right?
Yeah.
It's about loyalty, sacrifice, and those hard choices we have to make when our heart is pulling us in different directions.
Absolutely.
And Bella is facing maybe the biggest choice of her life in these excerpts.
Right.
It really makes you think, what would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you embrace the unknown, even if it meant leaving everything you know behind?
Yeah.
Or would you cling to your humanity, even if it meant a limited time with the one you love?
It's such a big question.
It is, and it's a question that goes beyond the world of Twilight, right? It speaks to what it means to be human.
Right. It's about facing our fears, embracing the unknown, and choosing our own path, even when the stakes are so incredibly high.
Exactly. So let's take a deep breath, gather our thoughts, and get ready to delve into the final part of our Twilight deep dive, because I have a feeling things are about to get really intense.
Oh, yeah. Buckle up.
Welcome back, deep divers. So we're here in the final stretch of our exploration into these Twilight excerpts, and it feels like things are really, coming to a head. Like the stakes are getting higher, the tension is building.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's getting good. And one thing that really stood out to me in these final excerpts is how, Bella's not just observing the supernatural world anymore. She's actively participating in it.
Aw.
She's training with the Cullens, she's learning to fight,
Right.
and she's even using her shield power to protect others.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big shift, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Like, she's not just a human caught between these two worlds. She's really becoming a force in her own right.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, like, what do you think is motivating her to take on this more active role?
I think it's a few things, right? Like, obviously, her love for Edward is a huge factor,
Hmm.
and then wanting to protect the people she cares about.
Mm.
But there's also this element of, like, her embracing her own power,
Yeah.
stepping into a role that she maybe never imagined for herself before.
Right. And realizing that she has agency even in these, like, extraordinary circumstances.
Exactly.
Right.
And even though things are crazy, she still has choices. She can still take action. And it's a pretty powerful message, right? About human resilience and the potential that we all have to, like, rise to meet challenges.
It is, yeah, that even when things feel really overwhelming, we still have the power to choose how we respond.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also interesting how these excerpts really highlight, like, the contrast between different approaches to power. Like, for example, the Volturi represent this very hierarchical, controlling kind of power, right?
Yes, they're all about maintaining order, enforcing their will on others.
And that's so different from the Cullens, right?
Right. I mean, they've made this conscious choice to limit their power, to try and live in harmony with humans, even if it means sacrificing some of their own desires.
It makes you think about, like, what does it mean to use power responsibly?
Mm.
Is it about control or is it about restraint?
Right, exactly. Like, where does true strength lie?
And then, of course, you've got Jacob and the werewolves, who represent this more primal, instinctual kind of power, right? Like
Mhm.
their connection to nature
Yeah.
and their pack mentality. It's fascinating and, a little intimidating at the same time.
Totally. They embody this raw, untamed energy that's both really compelling and, like you said, potentially destructive. It's a good reminder that power in any form can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it can be used for good or for bad.
And speaking of double-edged swords, Edward's mind-reading ability, I mean, that's a gift and a curse, right?
It really is. It gives him this incredible insight into others, but it also exposes him to their darkest thoughts, their
Mm.
deepest fears.
Yeah. Do you think that ultimately helps or hurts his relationships?
Ooh, that's a good question. It definitely complicates things. Like, imagine knowing everything someone's thinking, even the stuff they're trying to hide.
Yeah, there'd be no secrets.
Right. So it could create a sense of intimacy, but it could also lead to mistrust, resentment. It makes you think about the boundaries we need, even in our closest relationships. Right. And speaking of boundaries, Bella's shield power, it's almost like a physical manifestation of her own emotional boundaries.
Oh,
right?
that's interesting. Like, she's literally able to block out mental intrusion. It's a powerful metaphor for self-preservation, for setting limits in relationships.
It is. Like, she's learning to protect her own mind, her own heart, which is so important.
Yeah. And as she becomes more confident in her abilities, she really starts to question the rules and expectations that have been, imposed on her.
Right.
Like, she's challenging Edward's overprotectiveness. She's pushing back against the Volturi's authority. She's even confronting Jacob about his feelings. It's like she's finally finding her own voice.
Yeah, asserting her agency in a world that's trying to define her, put her in a box.
Right. And it's a really important reminder that we all have the right to choose our own path, even if it means breaking free from expectations, challenging the status quo.
And sometimes that's exactly what we need to do to find our own truth.
It is. And ultimately, Bella's choices lead to this confrontation with Victoria. It's a climax that, like, brings together all the themes we've been talking about. Love, loyalty, sacrifice, the nature of power, consequences. It's a battle for Bella's soul, really. A test of her values, her commitment to those she loves.
And it's a reminder that even when things are at their darkest, hope and love can still win out.
Yeah, it's a really powerful message.
It is. And these excerpts, they leave us with this sense of possibility, of new beginnings. Like, Bella's made her choice, she's embraced her destiny, and the future is uncertain but full of potential. It's kind of a perfect ending to a story that's all about transformation, self-discovery, and of course, the power of love.
It is, yeah. And it leaves you with that feeling of, like, what's next? What adventures are waiting around the corner?
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Twilight Saga, what are some of the key takeaways that really stuck with you?
I think for me, it's just that reminder that even in a world of supernatural beings, the most powerful forces are the ones inside us. Love, courage, the ability to choose, and the strength to face our fears.
I love that. It's so true. Because these excerpts have really shown us that even when we're faced with the extraordinary, it's the human choices, the connections we make, the values we hold dear that ultimately shape our destinies.
And maybe, just maybe, these excerpts have inspired you to look a little deeper into your own dreams, to question the boundaries of your own reality, and to, embrace those mysteries that life throws your way.
That's a great thought to leave us with. So until next time, deep divers, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those aha moments that make this journey so rewarding.